Today, we're tackling a question that feels like it's straight out of a comic book, but trust me, the consequences are incredibly real and, frankly, mind-bending. Let's get right into it.
Just imagine that. In one single silent instant, the invisible force that lets you sit in your chair, hold your phone. What if it all just vanished? What would actually happen? Well, as you're about to see, it's a whole lot more chaotic than you could possibly imagine.
All right, so before we unleash total planetary chaos, we need to get a grip, and yes, that pun is 100% intended, on what friction actually is and why it's so vital every single second of every single day.
At its heart, that's all it is. It's just a resistance, a drag. It comes from all the microscopic little bumps and imperfections on every single surface. It's that warmth you feel when you rub your hands together. Seems pretty simple, right? Well, the absence of this simple little force is anything but.
Probably the best way to think about it is this. Friction is the universe's default brake pedal. Without it, anything that starts moving just keeps moving and moving and moving forever, or at least until it slams into something else. There'd be no slowing down, ever.
Okay, so let's shrink this whole crazy idea down to a human scale. Let's make it personal. What would the very first moments of a frictionless world actually feel like? Forget your morning routine. Let's see if you can even get out of bed.
You would instantly be living in the world of this classic XKCD comic. Just this simple act of standing up, it becomes a physics nightmare. Your feet would have zero, and I mean zero grip on the floor. They'd just shoot out from under you. You wouldn't be on an ice rink, you'd be on a surface so slick it makes ice feel like sandpaper.
And this is where it gets really wild. Think about these everyday things. You try to grab your phone, it would just slip right out of your hand like it was coated in oil. That doorknob, your hand would just slide right off. You want to tie your shoes? Forget it. The knot would just instantly unravel. Every single simple interaction we take for granted would just fail.
So you can't even stand up. Pretty wild, right? But this chaos isn't just stuck in your bedroom. Let's zoom out a bit, because our entire civilization, pretty much everything we've ever built, is about to grind to a catastrophic halt.
Just take a car. A car becomes a total death trap. The tires just spin uselessly. They can't grip the road at all. And if you're already moving, well, steering and braking do absolutely nothing. It's just Newton's first law on full display. An object in motion stays in motion. Your car is now just a metal box sliding in a straight line until it hits something. Every road on Earth just became a terrifying, high-speed game of bumper cars.
And this illustrates just how deep the problem goes. Right down to the nuts and bolts of our world, literally. The friction holding nuts and bolts tight? Gone. They just vibrate loose and fall apart. Conveyor belts in factories, emergency brakes in elevators. Heck, even something as basic as striking a match to start a fire relies on friction. Everything just stops working.
And we can't forget about the air itself. Air friction, what we usually call drag, is absolutely critical. Without it, parachutes are just useless pieces of cloth. An airplane pilot loses a key way to control their speed, which makes landing almost impossible. You'd basically just have a long, uncontrolled slide down the runway. And on the ground, winds wouldn't be slowed by hills or trees anymore. They'd just gust at full, terrifying force.
As scary as all of that sounds, believe it or not, that's just the small stuff. That's the human scale. The real disaster, the truly apocalyptic event, happens when the planet itself loses its grip, when the very ground beneath our feet decides to let go.
This quote really paints a chilling picture. See, without friction, there's only one force left that decides where things go: gravity. And gravity only pulls one way, down. So anything that isn't physically bolted to the planet's core would just start to slide. People, cars, entire buildings, everything begins a slow, unstoppable journey to the lowest possible point it can find.
And this geological mayhem chart says it all. The Earth's entire surface just enters a state of total chaos. You know the friction that holds tectonic plates in check? Gone. The result? Every single fault line on Earth gives way in one simultaneous, planet-shattering earthquake. Every hillside, everywhere, collapses in a global landslide. And glaciers, they just rocket down mountainsides like unstoppable avalanches of ice. Okay, get ready for this number. 1,670 kilometers per hour. That's over 1,000 miles an hour. So, what is that? That's how fast the ground is moving right now, if you happen to be standing at the equator. So why don't we feel it? Well, the answer is friction.
It's the grip between the ground and the air that basically drags the atmosphere along with it for the ride. But what happens if you suddenly snap that link? You'd have the solid ground moving at supersonic speeds through a mostly stationary atmosphere. The air just wants to stay put. The result would be a planet-wide supersonic windstorm that would scour the surface of the Earth completely clean.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, our atmospheric shield against stuff from space would just fail. You know, shooting stars, those are just tiny bits of space dust and rock burning up because of the intense air friction when they hit our atmosphere. Well, without that friction, they don't burn up. They just fall. Every meteor shower becomes a literal rain of cosmic bullets hitting the ground at full speed.
Okay, so that is an absolutely bleak picture. A world in complete, unstoppable motion. But let's just ask a crazy question for a second. What if, somehow, a few people survived all that? Could humanity ever actually adapt to a world that has no grip?
I mean, is that even possible? Just think about it for a second. What kind of bizarre sci-fi tech would we need to invent just to do something as simple as moving from point A to point B without sliding off into infinity? Well, as you can see here, survival would have to be completely reinvented. You can forget walking. You'd probably need personal air thrusters just to get around, sort of like an astronaut on a spacewalk. We'd likely use powerful magnetic boots to lock onto metal floors. Need to get up a wall? You'd better have a suction cup grappling hook. Every single piece of technology would have to be re-engineered from the ground up.
Ultimately, that simple, unconscious act of holding on, something we all do 1,000 times a day without a single thought, it would have to be replaced by complicated, energy-hungry technology. Life itself would become this constant, conscious struggle against a world that is fundamentally designed to let you slip away.
And that really brings us right to the heart of it. Friction isn't just some boring concept from a high school physics class or some annoying force that wears down our tires. It is the essential, invisible grip that holds our entire world, our entire civilization together. It's the simple reason that anything stays put. This whole thought experiment really just pulls back the curtain on an invisible force we barely ever notice and shows it's one of the most critical pillars of our very existence. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other invisible force, what other fundamental rule of the universe are we all taking for granted right at this very moment?